right, so let's get it started. So, quick introduction of myself. My name is Bill Fisher. I'm one of the cybersecurity engineers at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. If you were here a little bit earlier and saw Kevin's talk at the very beginning, he talked about it a little bit as the applied space within NIST. And today I want to talk to you about a project we've done which involves multi-factor authentication, federation, and single sign-on for responders. And when I say that, I'm specifically referring to law enforcement, fire, and EMS, emergency medical services. So, quick show of hands here. Who is hearing about NIST for the very first time as they walk into this room today? The National Institute of Standards and Technology. Okay. Who does not know what the National knows except for one guy in the back? Wow. All right. We're doing. This is like the third time speaking here at CIS/Identiverse. For some of our later, I'll give you an overview. So for the people that aren't familiar with the down and we do is essentially we are part of that applied space, and we are the guys who literally roll up our sleeves and get into the lab and architectures for standards. Right? It's often said that NIST puts out a lot of great documentation what you should do, but when it comes to security, the devil's in the details, and you need to know how to do it. And so the center is here to help fill that space. The way we do that is we actually go out and engage specifically with different parts of the US economy. So if you're familiar with NIST and a lot of the SP1800 documentation we put out that's geared towards .gov systems in the federal space, we're not necessarily the same at the Center of Excellence. We do a lot of work with industry and non-federal government entities. And so the project I'm going to present to you today, we are doing for public safety first responders, and we've worked very closely with that community. I've been on like a 6-month sort of tour talking to public safety, trying to bridge the gap for identity concepts with public safety people who literally care about nothing else besides protecting life and property. You find it's a real challenge, and I have to break things down and break things down and break things down and explain things like what are OAuth tokens, how do you why, like all that type of stuff. So I'm super excited to present identity knowledge already. So let's start with sort of what was brought to us by public safety and first responders. So probably all familiar with these mobile devices here. This is, I think, a Galaxy device, right? I have an iPhone 7 here, and using these devices for our day-to-day interactions, we're pretty used to these, right? We all have these. And so are public safety first responders in their personal lives. But transitioning to using these in the actual world is a little bit different. So is anybody here aware of Firstnet? Show of hands, a few people. So you might be aware that there was a large contract released and was given to AT&T by the Firstnet Authority to actually build out a public safety broadband specific network. What that means is there's going to now be a network using 5G LTE technologies for these devices that gives public safety personnel what's called priority and preemption, right? So if there is a major catastrophe, like where I live in Washington, D.C., I don't know if anyone remembers like the mineral earthquake that happened several years ago back there where you couldn't send a text message at all, right? Well, it turns out that public safety had that same challenge about getting things through the network. And so AT&T and Verizon and several others are now giving them priority and preemption so that they have their own devices, and in a time of need, in a time of emergency, they can get on the network, and us normal people will be bumped off the network at some points in time. So these things are going to be the way of the future for these guys. There's going to be less and less of the land mobile radio, hey, I'm calling it in the dispatch, and much more of a, oh, I'm going to click on my CAD system or my record management system that is a native app on this device and access data that way, right? The typical client server or client to cloud SaaS model. And so that's all good and well. Those are all good technologies that are well baked within industry. But the challenge for these guys is really in the authentication space. And so if you're familiar with us at NIST and the work we've done in the authentication space, if you heard what Kevin talked about earlier around 863 version 3 that came out last year, you'll know that we have been trying to alleviate the password problem for several years now. So for public safety first responders, the idea of picking up this device in an emergency response scenario, clicking on an app, and then having to type a password where you have small screen, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, that's really not feasible for them just for one application, right? I don't know if you've ever talked to a police officer about authentication. He gives not 2 pennies about it. He doesn't care. And then that's even more of a challenge. You have to do that for every single mobile application that they are using on these devices, right? So if I have to click on my record management system, hey, we have slides. If I have to click on my records management system and authenticate there, if I have to then click on my computer-aided dispatch system and authenticate there, if I want to get access to the criminal justice investigative system and authenticate there, that's an untenable position from a usability perspective for public safety and first responders. And then additionally, just with passwords, we know the security challenges that come with passwords. All right, so let me see if we can test this. Wow, we got it. All right, guys. More photos now. We have slides. Great. So let me skip through some of these slides. I already gave you guys an overview of what the Center of Excellence is. I talked a little bit about our engagement model here. I forgot to mention quickly that the work we've done here is actually in collaboration with our another NIST division here, the Public Safety Communications Research Lab. So these are the real guys at NIST who have the public safety institutional knowledge, and I'm just the guy over the Center of Excellence saying, hey, what about the security stuff? Can we do that too? So we're coming to them and working directly with them. So perfect, up to the challenge slide. So as I said, public safety first responders, very worried about authenticating on these devices and the user experience that they're going to get and managing all the credentials. And the situation is exacerbated when time is of the essence in a situation where we're protecting life and property. You know, I always usually say the most critical authentication use case that I typically have in terms of my environment and probably authenticating in my car, right? Which, I don't know if you guys are using the iPhone 10, right? I don't have one, but and has done the facial recognition. Are you like going over like this? Are you putting the phone up to your device? Like, I mean, your device up to your face, like that type of thing? Yeah, device to face, yeah. So if you can, my consternation over having to do that while I'm driving, it's like tenfold for these guys, right? When they actually have to like, hey, there's a fire right here. Is there someone in the building, right? So we presented back to them a combination of 3 different capabilities, and I will not go in depth on these fundamental IDM concepts here, but multi-factor authentication, a single sign-on experience, and then use identity federation with the federating identities to a back-end cloud service. So to give you an idea of why an organization such as Firstnet, such as public safety and first responders, wouldn't come to the Center of Excellence and work with us, there's many key benefits. So the first one is we do everything collaboratively with the industry, and we went out and found the people writing the standards and the vendors that were building the technology, and we worked directly with them. Find in the tech a lot of effort, and you're not really smart and know your stuff. And public safety organizations do not have a lot of incredibly technical people, especially at the state and local levels. So we wanted to work directly with the people who were doing this because we had those contacts and they did not. And so what you'll see, I was, unfortunately because of our AV, I was going to demo the solution we have for you guys today. I'm not going to be able to do that on stage, but I'm happy to show anybody else afterwards. And we actually signed collaborative research and development agreements with 5 companies that you see down here at the bottom. Several of those companies may be here at the event today, maybe on the vendor floor. So if you're interested in their technologies or any of the like technologies, the vendor floor would be a great spot. The second benefit is everything that we do at the Center of Excellence here is always standards-based, right? National Institute of Standards and Technology, eat our own dog food. And so this architecture and this project is no exception. You can see several of the standards you may be familiar with up top. Some maybe you're less familiar with. And then for public safety, we really wanted to bring these guys what's latest and greatest in some of the modern mobile operating systems. I mean, as a technology person myself, it's hard to keep tabs on what's the latest thing coming out in the Apple developer notes, right? Gotta wait for the developers conference to see what they're gonna do. And then once you see the capabilities, you gotta dig into the APIs and figure it all out, right? People in public safety aren't doing this, man. They're not even thinking about it. So at the Center of Excellence, we have a great team of contractors. We have the MITRE organization with industry. We have a bunch of people that helped us do just that. And so the single sign-on capabilities that we're bringing to public safety are only things that have been available on iOS and Android for probably the last 3 years or so. So pretty recent. And then last, in true NIST fashion, we put out special publications for our projects. And so Kevin mentioned earlier the 1800 series documents. Those are the ones coming out of the Center of Excellence. And specifically, if you want to know more about this project, just Google SP1800-13. So our document is out on the streets. It is currently open for public comment, I believe, until mid-July. So when you come back well refreshed from the 4th of July vacation, you should be ready to document or ready to comment on our documents. And if you go to any of our documents, you'll see there's 3 different sections, a Part A, a Part B. For this community, the most 2 relevant ones is Part A, an executive summary, and then Part B is the security architecture and approach and all the standards we used. So if you're going to all these talks on Identiverse this week and you're hearing about all the standards that are being used, what you see in our architecture and our approach should be very similar. We're using the standards and best practices that are out there today. And I always throw in a quick plug that this is something we did for public safety and first responders, but this project is not limited to that community. This architecture applies to any organization that would like to do single sign-on on these devices, would like to do multi-factor authentication on these devices. So a few of the challenges we really want to address with this project. The password challenge I already sort of touched on, but when they're complex, they're hard to remember, they're hard to type. If you need one for each application, it gets worse. And then what we often find, especially with public safety organizations, is they just reuse the same credentials across multiple applications. And so, if one application database or credential database is breached and somehow the credentials get out, they could be replayed as valid credentials against other systems. And then lastly, passwords are very easily phished. If you look at the Verizon data breach incident report that came out this year, stolen credentials and phishing are still at the top of the list. Maybe not quite as obvious of a challenge, but we really want to try and get some of these mobile app developers out of the authentication space, right? And the idea that they will roll their own authentication systems or just misuse some of the APIs and technology that's out there or forget to use things like hardware-backed key stores and such. And so I'll talk a little bit about it later, but there is a really handy SDK that some of you may be aware of that helps handle this authentication challenge for developers. And then lastly, the single sign-on piece, right? We want to reduce the number of credentials that public safety organizations have to manage. I sort of quip here, more credentials, more problems. Those credentials have real life cycles and costs associated with them. So I don't actually have a demonstration for you today, but I can tell you what we actually built out for this demonstration and use some of my props to talk about what the experience might actually be like. So we have currently this architecture up and running on Android devices and iOS devices, so it works cross-platform. And what we did was, first we wanted to have a good, strong, all-level of authentication. Right? So if you're familiar with 863 version 3, the 3 levels of authentication assurance, organizations can determine which level is best for them based on their risk, but we wanted to build something that would allow them to get to level 3 of assurance. And so if you're accessing law enforcement sensitive information, protected health information, or personally identifiable information, that might be really sensitive to your organization. And in some cases, if you're familiar with CGIS, or if you're familiar with HIPAA, there may be requirements that necessitates a higher level of assurance. So we've accomplished that by using the FIDO protocols. Quick show of hands, who here knows what FIDO is? Who here has a YubiKey on their persons or in a laptop or some other FIDO U2F authenticator? Yeah. Who has more than 5 on their person? Yeah. Wow, nice job. All right, I think I only have four between my backpack and my stuff right now, so you got me beat. So this FIDO technology, if you've been to Identiverse or CIS, it's been around for several years now, right? I think it was first put out in 2013, and the whole goal for FIDO multi-factor authentication ubiquitous. And so in this project, we've actually used both of the FIDO standards. We've used the FIDO UAF, Universal Authentication Framework. So you get multi-factor there using a biometric. Fingerprint typically, can also be face, could also be voice. Would work with the iPhone X, for instance, if you want to use face. And then a private key, and that private key is stored on the device you're using. And I'm holding up a mobile phone here, but it equally works on a laptop device. And then the other version of FIDO authentication would be the FIDO U2F, the Universal Second Factor Protocol or specification. And so that uses external hardware authenticators. Yubico makes them, Facient, there's a bunch of companies that have these guys out there. I have a NFC, a near-field communication enabled YubiKey here for this, that we use in this project. And so for the U2F authentication, you're going to get multi-factor via an Active Directory PIN and password that we're all know and love, and a external hardware authenticator where there's a private key stored on that device. And then the third capability here is the single sign-on experience. And so what we've done for single sign-on is use the combination of a IETF standard that leverages OAuth 2.0 for single sign-on, and we've combined that with identity federation, right? So a lot of organizations think about federating between two different organizations in a sort of B2B scenario. We're, in this case, support that, but we're actually federating to mobile application backends, right? So in our particular build, we have set up 3 different Motorola applications that support OAuth 2, so they're OAuth-enabled applications using the authorization code flow. And they've actually implemented the SDK that we've implemented, which is the AppAuth SDK. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But that is an SDK that out of the box implements this OAuth flow that we're talking about. And so the basic scenario is that a public safety first responder can click on any native app on their device that's integrated into this architecture that supports OAuth. They can be redirected with a federation flow back to an IDP, which will be most likely their home organization. So I'll use like NYPD, for instance. And so an NYPD user would say, I want to get into a specific app. They will then be redirected via the browser redirect to their home organization, and they will FIDO. And so the key piece here is that they are using whatever credential, in this case, hopefully FIDO, but even if it's not, if it's just username, password, Active Directory, they're using whatever credential their organization has already given them and not getting a new credential from the actual third-party service provider. So they don't need a account created for them on the back end at Motorola Solutions. They're using their own identity coming from NYPD. I don't know if it's NYPD.gov or NYPD.com, something like that. So the user authenticates, and then when they authenticate, there's a federation assertion that's sent back to the cloud, and an authentication actually occurs with the OAuth authorization server and says, yes, I've received an identity from an organization I trust, and that's whether that's in a SAML response or an OpenID response. We've implemented both in this architecture. And then the user is now authenticated to that authorization server's backend and eligible to receive access tokens via OAuth. And so the single sign-on piece comes with the access token and the refresh token being given to the actual client applications. And so when the user clicks on an app, they go through the authentication flow, they get redirected all the way back to the cloud service provider. That app then gets a set of tokens, and the user is then given access to the application. And that second part, the issuance of tokens, occurs each time the user clicks on a new app. So in a true OAuth flow, right, this is one of the big benefits of a token-based OAuth system, the user each application gets a unique set of tokens for itself, and those set of tokens are only good for that application's backend. And then in addition to that, if the user wants to, say, leave a Motorola ecosystem and go to some other cloud service provider, the single sign-on can persist. At that point in time, the redirect would go all the way back to their IDP where they would have a session, and another SAML or OpenID assertion will be sent, and then they will be authenticated with that new authorization server via OAuth, and then they will be able to those applications will be eligible to receive tokens. Again, I have a demo if you guys want to see it afterwards, and I can show you all of this, all this working. So I want to talk a little bit about the standards we've used. and specifically about the OAuth standard that we've used and the SDK that implements this standard. So some of our good friends, some of them actually even in this room, went out and wrote RFC 8252, which is using OAuth 2.0 for native applications. And so this is a specific flow for, implements a specific or calls for a specific flow for the OAuth 2 protocol and implements some other standards around that, some standards that are good for OAuth best practices such as PKCE, the proof key for code exchange, and I think soon to be will be the token binding work that's happening underneath the IETF. And so the reason for this flow being developed was actually the advent of what's called a browser tab inside of the iOS and Android operating systems. So if anybody's a developer here, you might be familiar with the old web views. So there used to be the case where when the app wanted to provide a user with a specific browser-like functionality, they would code in this web view. And the challenge with that is actually that the application itself and or the application backend could have access to the credentials that were being provided through that web view. We wanted to get away from that and have some sort of experience that's more akin to a web SSO, more akin to what you get on the laptop devices. And we wanted to have that on these native devices. So iOS, so the Apple folks, the Android folks put in these browser tabs. On iOS, it's called the Safari View Controller. On Chrome, it is called the Chrome Custom Tabs. And so those allow for a persistent state to happen across applications and allow for no need to actually give credentials to an actual application itself, whether it's the client on the device or in the app backend. And so in true OAuth form, every token that's issued comes with a limited scope of authorization. And so that would be only good for the app backend that it was granted for. And then you can set the actual timeouts and the expiration dates on that. If you're familiar with OAuth, access and refresh tokens, this is all plain vanilla OAuth, nothing special here. And so the good folks over at the Google Identity team actually developed an SDK and gave it to the OpenID Foundation that's called AppAuth. And so if you do a quick Google for AppAuth, short authorization, the first two links you'll find are GitHub repositories, one for iOS, one for Android, that has this SDK there. So for the developers that are in this space, and specifically for those people who might consider looking at the public safety first responder community with applications and might want to get on the brand new Firstnet application developer portal with their new apps, you should be looking at this SDK to help you implement authentication and single sign-on. So it's pretty much drag and drop, and when there's an update to the standards or when the new token binding work comes out, this SDK will be updated. You can drag that and drop that into your application, and you'll get the latest and greatest. So this helps to get the developers out of the sort of roll your own space, right? The standards exist, but they're not even really left to implement the standards. They have an SDK that they can drag and drop and put in. Some of the benefits of the architecture. So as I mentioned before, there's three challenges we're trying to solve: password challenge, managing credentials challenge, getting the developers out of the authentication space. We are pretty good at tackling all of those challenges. So the general benefit of a single sign-on architecture, right, is we're trying to reduce the amount of time and attempts that public safety first responders spend authenticating. Plain and simple, they don't want to spend time on it, they can't. Two is we're actually trying to alleviate some of the need for complex passwords. So the new NIST standards have complexity requirements that are very much revised. So if you're familiar with the old, uppercase, lowercase, special character changes days, those are now out the window, now down to requirements. No need to actually change it every 30, 60, 90 days. And one of the ways we can feel more confident with that type of system is making sure we have a good second factor in place. And so implementing things like FIDO allow us to do that. So you can reduce your requirements for complex passwords. Increase interoperability. That is the name of the game when it comes to standards, and this is an entire standards-based architecture. And moreover, it's really big for any community, especially public safety, who does not have a lot of dollars for security, to not propose things like rip and replace. And so being able to use and leverage their current Active Directory is a big win for them. They don't want to create any more identities. I talked to one big public safety organization who literally had their leadership say, you shall not procure or deploy another damn identity store. No more. None. So if you propose a new architecture solution that requires it, that's a non-starter right off the bat, because the cost of managing all of them was just getting too high. One of the big benefits of FIDO that I didn't touch on previously is you get the flexibility of the authenticator ecosystem that's within FIDO. So there's two different versions of FIDO, right? The biometric version, there's an external authenticator version. If you're a firefighter and you're wearing gloves, biometrics not doing a whole lot for you if it's fingerprint, right? And maybe not doing a whole lot for you if it's facial recognition and you're wearing a mask. And maybe not doing a whole lot for you if it's voice recognition and your environment is very loud, right? So in that case, you might want something like one of these U2F authenticators where you can just tap it to the back of the device and authenticate. That said, if you're a police officer and you might have to wrangle a suspect, right? Or you already carry a bajillion things on your body, body-wear cams, your badge, your mace, your gun, your nightstick, whatever, right? Carrying another one of these guys, especially when, no offense to police officers, they might be prone to forget something like this at home or tackle somebody and, break something like this. Maybe that's not the use case they want to go with, and instead they want to go a biometric route. So that flexibility in that ecosystem, choosing different authenticators based on the individual needs of your organization and the use cases for the users in your organization is a big benefit of the FIDO ecosystem. The security benefits, looking at FIDO, one of the nice things is we've mapped the FIDO into the 863 standards we talked about before. As I said, we can get up to level of assurance at the authentication assurance level. If you've read 863, one of the big stressors there is what's called verifier compromise resistance. The idea that you don't really want to have a large cache of authentication secrets placed somewhere where it might become a really high-value target. I know friends to our friends in the room who may be RSA, but one of the classic examples is the RSA Lockheed Martin breach, where all of those seeds were held in one spot for those RSA tokens to go replenish or refresh all those tokens, right? We want to try and get away from that, and so the FIDO protocols support that natively, right? As I said, there's no cache of secrets stored in one place. The private keys stay on here. You get that phishing resistance that we were talking about before when we're limited, that we get when we just are using passwords. And then the single sign-on piece, eliminating the need for individual passwords is really big, making sure there's limited as I talked about with OAuth, and then reducing the numbers of credential reuse. If they only have one Active Directory credential, and in the U2F case, or excuse me, in the UAF case where they can use their biometric, they don't even need a password, that's a big advantage for the public safety community, not having to credentials. So, our guide is out, public safety comment periods. Please take a look. It goes into way more detail than I could go in this very abbreviated session. We are actually working on the iOS support still. So for those of you who are in the know, you might know that iOS has what's called an SF authentication session API that's supposed to handle a single sign-on. It appears that that API is bugged and does not work as intended. And so we currently have this architecture working strictly with where our hope is that Apple will fix this in iOS 12 out some few months. To integrate VPN into this architecture. Public safety first responders often use VPN as their first form of authentication, so they're not typically going right into a federation. We've built it out. And a FIDO authentication with a VPN solution is an area that we haven't really seen a lot of FIDO do or a lot of industry even look at. So we're taking a look at what that space might look like. So a quick call to action for this community, since everybody here is very focused on identity. We are looking at some new beyond our public safety and first responder work, and not necessarily for the public safety and first responder sector. So I would encourage everybody this week, while you're here, to look into the new FIDO 2.0, or what is being called underneath the W3C, the OAuth Standard. So FIDO took their initial protocols, the U2F, the UAF, they donated to W3C. You might be familiar with W3C, the sort of standards body that referees all of the browsers, right? So we can avoid the browser wars that happened in the 90s where people weren't interoperable. And so the WebAuth standard is now in its penultimate state and is now being deployed in commercially available technology. So I believe so does the Mozilla Firefox stuff. I think Microsoft has it implemented on several of their platforms as well with the new Windows Hello features. And so the things that the Center of Excellence would like to do is to look at around FIDO, right? So what do you do for lifecycle management? What are the different deployment models that you can engage with? How do you handle things? FIDO authenticators, how do you with FIDO tokens afterwards? There's a lot of different areas that are out there to look at. We'd also look at what use cases might exist for the FIDO platform. So if you're not familiar, for instance, the new FIDO 2 external keys will no longer require a username and password to be used with them, like the YouTube I was talking about earlier. So that might be for communities to say, hey, you know what? Now that we can completely get off a password using some of these guys, we might want to think about it. And so we're going to be looking at out of public safety that might be interesting. So if anybody is in the FIDO space or the WebAuthn space and is interested in talking about what a project might look like, and specifically if you're interested in being a collaborator with the center, find me this week, grab my card, that type of thing. And then our next step within responders is we are standing up again in collaboration with the Public Safety Communications Research Group over in Boulder that I talked about, that other NIST lab, a lab for doing identity federation. So if you heard what Dave was talking about in terms of some of the trust frameworks earlier, if you're familiar with some of the work that's gone on in the past, whether it's the National Identity Exchange Federation, the GFIPM program, you'll probably attempts federation frameworks within many communities and specifically within public safety. They've never really gotten critical mass. So we, at the center, we can't tackle everything, right? There's a lot of politics at play. There's a lot of getting from data at play that we're not really going to be able to help with. But we can, as that community tries to build momentum for federation technologies, help them out by demonstrating how those technologies might work today, commercially available in our lab environments. So one of the things we've actually done with the SSO architecture is we've, in our lab, extended the Active Directory schema, put in some of the GFIPM attributes that public safety was looking to use, and showed how we can federate them using OpenID or SAML assertions, and how they can be made available to back-end applications for doing things like authorization. So we're looking to demonstrate for that community what can be done with federation technologies and provide some more guidance to them when they are ready to implement, when they finally get past some of the politics, when they finally get past some of the buy-in from data owner challenges that determine and trust frameworks they want to use. There will already be guidance for the technology piece of it and the standards and best practice piece of it. So if anybody is interested in the federation lab we're working on, follow afterwards and grab my card and we'll talk about what we want to actually do in that space there. My contact information is here. If you go to the NCCoE website and find the generic email we have for the Public Safety First Responder project and email it, goes directly to my inbox. So slide deck on our website, you're 1 degree of information from me at all times. So, you shouldn't have a problem finding me. And just the last plug, if you want to see, if you want to actually see the demo videos that I had, I was kind of hoping to show today. If you want to see how we actually developed a little police badge, 3D printed one that we're putting YubiKeys in the back of to show public safety first responders how these things might actually be built into some of the things they already wear. You're more than welcome to check that out as well. Any questions or comments? Sort of a fire hose of information. Yeah, pun intended. You like that? No, you're the only one who picked up on that. The fire hose of information. Come on, public safety first responders. Great, guys. Well, find me around all week and check out our document online. All the information you could ever want is up there. Thanks.